Well, number one, I think probably everyone would be advised to stay fairly liquid in their portfolios because this crisis is being very carefully managed, but only up to a point. And at that point, it goes over the lip. And this, the Tiananmen Square massacre point, is the previously most novel point ever tested in the history of, the cosmos. So at some point late December or early next January, we're going to push through that, having been on this long slide down. So now, an absolute prediction, what this is saying is that the big change to watch for is around the 20th of November. The elections will be over the week between the end of there, and you can feel the momentum, the inevitability of it. I mean, they'll be very hard-pressed to hold it together till then. If we focus in there, let's take a look at that. See how it ripples. See how at the end it begins to come apart. You can't even tell where the top of the peak is because obviously they just get it all piled up, these shitloads and shitloads of bombs and gas and all this stuff. And then it rattles out of their control, and then there's a bifurcation, a phase split, and down she comes.
That's what, November
20th? November 20th. So then I thought that this was pretty interesting. So then I want to show you something else. I want to completely change our target date and everything. Let's use the command C. Yes. Okay. What we're looking at now is 200 years. And these 200 years are from 499 AD until 699 AD. Now, why are we looking at these years? Do you remember how in what we were just looking at, I said that we came down, that I said that the Berlin Wall was here, the Romanian Revolution was here, then the SNL crisis and all that, then Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait here at the bottom of this, and that I expected war to break out at the top of this. Now we're looking at the historical resonance of what we were just looking at before. We're looking at a much larger span of time, and what I want to show you is that when we put it close to where Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, that's where he invaded Kuwait, it tells us that the resonant date is 579 AD. The accepted date for the birth of Muhammad is 571. So when you move it to 571, it's only off by that much. So what this means is that this situation in the Middle East, we have chosen to confront this guy at a period when the resonance which backs up what he is doing is the resonance of the birth and career of the Prophet himself. Now, when you move it over to the date, the resonance which corresponds with the 25th of November, it's 599. The Hijra was in 622 down there, and then Muhammad didn't live much longer after that. But the gains of Islam were all put in place. I mean, this is the great gradient along which Islam made its respond to in terms of next year. It corresponds to the 30th of March. The 30th of March corresponds to the Hijra and the subsequent death of Muhammad. So what it means is that in the way that history is both a plotted and unconscious process, we have managed to stumble into a situation where we will probably be sacrificed to the engine of historical inevitability. It's no moment to confront Islam. I think probably Allah will be very merciful to the armies of the Caliph. But, then there's a faction which is saying, oh, well, so is this the end of the world, and is this Armageddon, and yak. No, of course not. All this is practically a memory by 1996 or 7, when whole other problems loom. I mean, no, it's just some kind of crazy military adventure cloaked in the form of a World War II.5 or something. There will be a lot of this stuff, if this wave is correct, as we move toward the millennium and beyond it. Because you see, what's happened is all these historical themes, the birth and expansion of Islam, the rise of medieval Europe, the birth of the machine age, so on and forth, all of this stuff is going to occur in a compressed form between now and 2012 AD. I mean, this is my notion that the mushroom wants to put forth, that the universe is not going to exist for billions or even hundreds of millions of years into the future, that actually the historical process signifies something loose in the informational domain that is very strictly self-limiting. And so history doesn't go off millennia into the future. History, because of the way in which it is feeds back into technological development, history is some kind of self-limiting process that transforms the material that it works upon. And the material that it works upon are, human lives, human destinies. I would never have come to this idea myself. I mean, it's too irrational for me. But when you think, you can then, once it's articulated, make a case for it. I mean, after all, what is the counter case? What do straight people have to offer? Well, what straight people have to offer is that the universe sprang from nothingness in a single instant from an object whose diameter was less than that of a single electron. Well, hell, if you could buy into that, what couldn't you buy into? I mean, it's like the grossest series of imponderabilities and unlikelihoods that you could string together. You mean, where does this go?
Yeah, you started at 6 billion years. What if you had started at 20 billion years ago?
Well, the duration of the wave, it has no. Oh, excuse me. The wave has no defined physical duration because it's a mathematical entity. It does have convenient breakpoints at 72 billion years and 1.5 billion years. And because we know there are things that have gone on that have taken more than 1.5 billion years, but we don't know of anything that's gone on that's taken more than 72 billion years, we've sort of rested with the assumption that fiction. Do you see how the idea of the resonance works? It works in a very literary fashion, somewhat in the way that James Joyce wrote Ulysses. Ulysses is the story of a man who seeks to buy kidneys for his breakfast in Dublin. But in so doing, he manages to be Ulysses and to visit all the ports of call that are listed and mentioned in the Odyssey. In other words, it's allegory, it's internalization of a scheme of action in one time and place and transferring it to another. But I think that this is how life is really put together, and that this is what psychedelics teach you on one level. Is one way of putting it is Rome falls 9 times an hour, and you just have to be paying attention 9 times an hour to see it go by. And everything else happens 9 times an hour and 3 times a day and once a week and twice a month and 4 times a year and 8 times a millennium and so forth and so on. And we're stacked up inside this system of resonances, historical references, ghosts, scattered mirages, images, the memories of the casuistry of past events. Yeah.
So when you say 2012, I'm not understand what you're saying. You're saying then we no longer resonate with these other times in the past, and is that what they mean by the end of ordinary history?
Well, yeah, I sort of fudged. I didn't say what happens in 2012. I don't really know. I imagine it to be this event that has to do with, you know how I said the universe is a machine for the conservation of novelty, but that it conserves and produces novelty at an ever faster and faster rate, and that the presence of human history actually indicates that we have entered into what Whitehead called the short epochs, meaning kinds of time that are coherent unto themselves, but that may last only a few centuries or only a few decades, you know. I mean, the way in which the 20th century is a time unto itself. Well, I see this speeding up until the point where nobody will be unaware of the fact that the whole space-time continuum is somehow collapsing on itself. It's a fairly literary idea because we're accustomed to thinking of space-time as just sort of hanging around. We're not accustomed to the idea of it migrating toward a point. But I think that the whole human species is involved in birthing some kind of alchemical object or some kind of transcendental something, and that, you know, the reason our history is haunted by messiahs and prophets and wild-eyed characters preaching doom and redemption is because in our dreams, in our visions, we're picking up like 5% seepage from the transcendental object in hyperspace, and it's what gives history a kind of
Object in hyperspace
is
picking up the vibrations from, that's the thing in the future.
Yes, and it's giving history a kind of compass, so that we keep correcting our course. We're not even aware this is what we're doing, but we are actually stumbling toward and defining into narrower and narrower areas this thing that we're after. And when we finally grab onto it, you know, it'll be wonderful.
Is that what the algorithm pointed towards?
Yes, the algorithm pointed toward that, and when we sought best fit between the curve and the historical data, it seemed to point toward 2012. Then what was a good confirmation or a curious coincidence, depending on where you stand, is that the whole Mayan calendrical axis turns out to rotate on the same day, the exact same day. For some reason, the Maya, who had a calendar of 5,306 years of 13 baktuns, 13 cycles, made the winter solstice of 2012 AD the axis point of their whole calendrical machinery. Now, the only thing I have in common with the Maya is we both have this affiliation with the mushroom. Is it conceivable? It's barely conceivable to me that the message in the mushroom is specific enough that no matter in what time or place you take it, it directs you toward a specific solstitial event and a particular annual journey of the planet around the sun. Then the question becomes, well, there are a number of questions, the least of which is, how did they do this? And then the major one is, why? Why do this? What does it mean to encode a prophecy into a psychedelic plant? And then to have people dig it out so close to the attractor event that they're really helpless to do anything other than witness it anyway. No, this is the stuff of pathology. It fills the back wards of our private mental hospitals. But, something's going on. You just have to wonder.
How did King Wen know that?
Well, that's a good question. Yes. Why the I Ching, which is what you're asking? Isn't it a little quirky to hang your whole theory on a mathematical sequence derived from an ancient Chinese book of divination? I mean, how dilettantish can you get, But the answer is no, because what they were trying to do with the I Ching was they were trying to create a general topology of categories, or a general typographic list of temporal categories. And the way they did it was by looking into their minds, by stilling overt physiological functions like breathing and heartbeat, and looking into their minds and seeing phenomena which we might call mental, which they might call physical, which somebody else might call quantum mechanical, but the ontological status of this phenomena is not ultimately what's important. What's important is that careful observation be carried out on it, and that it be correctly categorized. And what they saw was the organizational rules of time itself. And what put me on to the idea that this was not so strange was I noticed a year or so ago, I was looking at sand dunes, and I noticed that sand dunes look like wind. And this is a fairly trivial observation, except for me it wasn't, because I'd never thought it before. I mean, this always is tugging at the edge of your mind when you look at sand dunes, but for me it wasn't overt. Okay, sand dunes look like wind. What does this mean? It means that a physical phenomenon, sand dunes, takes its form from its interaction against a wave mechanical phenomenon, to wit, the pressure fluctuation of wind over time. And then I said, aha, so the sand dune looks like wind because it was made by wind. So then I said, well then, everything in the world bears the signature of the time wave within it, because everything in the world arose within the context of time. So, it's no more odd that we have within ourselves the time wave than that pebbles are round from being rolled in the ocean. It's just a consequence of what is etched upon you, within you. And so these Taoist yogas or proto-Taoist yogans were looking at the organization of mind and seeing arises within the larger fractal context of organic nature, which arises within the fractal context of, electromagnetic forces or whatever. So it's what starts out looking like a miracle, that the King Wen sequence could have a magical wave inside it that would describe human history, ends up looking like a kind of unavoidable and trivial fact writ large over the face of all existence, that all objects in time have internalized within themselves images of the larger process in which they are embedded. Yeah, Kim.
Other than King Wen, right?
Yes, there are sequences other than King Wen, and there are systems other than this. And I think it's a groping. We're trying to see pattern, and no pattern is wrong, but no pattern is all of the pattern, at least not yet. One of the quotes that I'm fond of using vis-a-vis this and the psychedelic experience is something that Alfred North Whitehead said about understanding. He said, understanding is apperception of pattern as such. That's all. As such. So if you look at this room and you look at women and where they're seated, you learn something about the people in this room. There's a pattern to how the women are seated. If, on the other hand, you look at the pattern of people who wear glasses, that's a different pattern. It also tells you something about the room. And there is just pattern upon pattern upon pattern. The people with blue eyes, where the Jews are sitting, where the Irish are sitting, the older people, the younger people. There's no limit to the number of patterns that can be extracted from a situation. And each one somehow gives us more control over the situation. So what this is the pattern to process. We know that there's a pattern to process because we have a very simple model like this in English and in most languages. It's that most of us agree that most things have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And, if we're in the beginning, we look for the middle. If we've passed the middle, we're looking out for the end. This means we have a theory of process. And in a way, when you look at history's fractal mountain, it looks like the single discharge of a nerve. All it is a beginning, a middle, and an end. And process can, William Blake said, attend the minute particulars. It's all in the details. This is what psychedelics teach, I think, is it's all in the details. Getting there is half the fun. The experience of life is in the fabric of it, the actual tactility of the passing moment. Yeah.
What does the pattern look like between now and 2012?
Between now and 2012, let me see if I'm still together enough to get such a thing together.
Has this ever been correlated with astrology?
Oh yeah, different people have looked at it. Let's see, specify target date. Let's say the first month, the first day of 1995, let's say of 2000. Okay, and we're over here. We're poised up here. See, we're about to make the big descent. This will give you an idea. This was a good one to look at because this both gives us the perspective, because it's hellish. Now there's that's January, February, that's the 2nd of March. January, February, that's the 2nd of February, 1992. That's when all of this stuff is maximized. It's a long way in the future. All of 91, see, is down along here. Where we are now, well, there's the projected date when the war goes over the hump. We're down here, 9/29/90. But approaching this extremely low level of novelty, which I suspect is, this huge expansion of the power of Islam and probably not so much good for America and the American banking industry. But then we have to live through all of this stuff, a huge series of fluctuations, well past the turn of the century, before finally we get on the long slide. And, it's fairly spectacular. It's an effort to explain the sense of time speeding up, the sense of the acceleration and into deeper and deeper connectedness. It obviously can't go on for centuries, happened in the past. But what our attention is going to be riveted on for the next little while is this, because this is the deepest level of novelty ever explored to date. There's where we are on the 10th of January, having come from clear up here as recently as the 25th of November.
If where we are now relates to Muhammad's birth, then where do we end up in 2021?
2012?
Relationship backwards.
Oh, well, then it all comes together, see? I mean, like in late 20. You can see here it shows that what we're progressing through, we still have to go through the medieval period. We'll do that in 96, 97.
Dark Age.
The discovery of the New World occurs up here in 2005. And then, the Industrial Revolution, 2009, so forth and so on. So it's a very steep compression. And then the way it works, actually, is when you get into these final epochs, you get a 384-day cycle in which everything is recompressed, then a 6-day cycle, and then, a cycle that lasts an hour and a half, and one that lasts 135 seconds, and so forth. And it's the spin dizzy principle. It's exactly the principle that's used to explain the birth of the universe by straight people, except they put it all back in the first half nanosecond of the universe, and I want to put it at the end. And the reason mine seems more logical to me is what we're talking about here is an outlandish singularity. Well, they say the singularity sprang from empty space. Seems to me the least likely medium for a complex singularity to emerge from is a high vacuum. More likely that a singularity would emerge from a teeming world of human beings and machines and psychedelic drugs and jungles and ecosystems, and that in a super rich informational matrix like that, something might suddenly crystallize out that would be absolutely improbable and fulfill the need for an attractor, a vector for novelty. Yeah.
Time something does the dawn line of a given day actually follows?
Well, the way the software is set, it's set for the dawn line at La Chorrera in the Amazon, which is also the dawn line for New York City. When we were doing our most crazed thinking on this subject, the fantasy was that it would take 24 hours and that it would follow, as you call it, the dawn line, the terminator of the planet, so that as the sun rose, it was hypothesized to have something to do with actually the geomagnetic strum, or what we called the heliomagnetic strum of the star. And so as the sun rose over a 24-hour period, this implosion would occur. It's interesting. I don't understand this theory in the sense that it seems to me it should be fairly easy to overthrow. It's making such highly punctuated prediction. It seems, but yet it's a curious thing. It's very hard to imagine how anyone could quote unquote figure this out. It seems that you would have to find it all at once, done somehow. There's no way into it where you could start to figure it out. So it has this curious completedness. And as a person who was not even that interested in the I Ching, and certainly less interested in diddling around with graph paper, that I should be the John the Baptist of this new dispensation is pretty peculiar. I'm not even into long division. Liz.
When you were balancing out the various factors in testing out the theory of fractal time, for instance, you've been talking about the spread of Islam and its the growth of poetry and science and so forth within it. But I didn't hear you mention the Inquisition.
One of the strengths and weaknesses of the theory is that it's pretty non-specific. Maybe astrology tries to say too much. Maybe this tries to say too little. But the Inquisition happened down, actually it was stretched out over time, so it depends on what you're actually talking about. But the great novel century, the 15th century, the 1400s, occurs along this gradient. Yeah, novelty is a kind of morally neutral term. I mean, is an invading army raping and pillaging and mixing its genes with the local populace? Is this come out as a plus or a minus on the novelty scale? I don't know. I confess I'm puzzled by this. It's a pretty powerful concept. I mean, I think we do feel in our own lives the ebb and flow of this quality, and that when it's, when you're hot, when you're not. That's what that's saying. Yeah.
Well, when you were talking earlier about novelty in Sheldrake and novelty versus habit, there was the upswings on this graph where I heard you describe as sort of, conservatism, and the downswings were novelty and new things happening. New things like people in this room generally would like. At least that's how I was hearing it.
Oh, new things like generally people in this room would like. No.
Things that orient themselves towards peace and...
Oh, no, I don't think so. I think a world war here will do just fine to fulfill the novelty requirements of the situation. What amazed me about it was when I was sitting up here after the Romanian Revolution and looking at this hole here, I was saying, boy, something outlandish is going to have to happen, or we're going to have to toss this sucker right out the door. Well, then, lo and behold, with this weird sense of déjà vu and startled amazement and yet vindication, yet horror and disbelief and so forth, it all comes to pass. It fulfills an impossible prophecy. How many times can it do it? Check this out. We've got to get through this, but this thing occurs over a 3-month period in 1995. From March to May, what men are going to go through look like peanuts. So there are built-in tests in the wave so that if it's junk, we should be able to get rid of it long before we're anywhere near 2012. And yet we're meeting now the first of these difficult tests, the first prediction of a steep descent into radical novelty. And the armies and chancelleries of the world are just rushing furiously to fulfill the prophecy. Yeah. Well, except that that's a kind of a fart at the opera if what you believe is happening is a conservation of novelty, a knitting together, an ever deepening and enriching and connecting kind of thing, and then they drop the bomb. The only way that could redeem it is if our real destiny is in another dimension, and sort of like that wonderful scene at the end of Dr. Strangelove where they sing the song, "We'll meet again someday, somewhere." I don't think it is nuclear holocaust. I think nuclear holocaust is the shadow of the alchemical concrescence, and that what it is somehow a way of coaxing the human soul into physical manifestation. I mean, the flying saucer, the extraterrestrial visitant, the philosopher's stone, alchemical mercury, some way to really realize our dreams. I mean, I think that is really the promise of the psychedelic experience. The thing you find out at the core of the psychedelic experience that you cannot believe, no matter how hard you try, because it's so liberating, is that, dreams are real, apparently. History, there is a way out. It isn't the high walls, all that. It's an illusion. There's some tremendous act of intellectual apprehension or courage or something, and then you break through. You penetrate beyond the mask. There is a mask, there is a beyond the mask. But most people go to the grave without ever even making the effort. Yeah.
Now that you have this kind of pictogram matrix, have you tried superimposing it on any other phenomenon like a heartbeat on an EKG or an oscilloscope readout of music, or anything that you could give form to, another waveform?
Yeah, I mean, the way I think of it is all phenomena are describable within this wave matrix. And when I was at my most illuminated or loaded, or however you want to put it, I could actually see it overlaid over reality. I could actually see that people are knots of novelty in local genetic space. The local space is largely empty, and then there are these knots of space-time where genetic expression and protein transcription is going on. And these are people, and they represent, this extreme concrescence of novelty. Well, then, if you're in a city or something, you see that it is a larger yet more diffuse knot of the same kind of novelty. And, I don't know whether you're losing your mind or assimilating a wave mechanical way of looking at things, but this is it comes close almost to some of the ravings of Carlos Castaneda, that there's a way of shifting perception and processing information, and then you see that, people are interlocking networks of light. They are confluences of casuistry, both in space and time as well as in matter. And no, I was quite into all of this. And it sort of sticks with me. It's model building, yeah.
I see the relationship between chaos and novelty, but this seems like such a rigid order to me, and I don't see a balance in chaos to it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, it's rigid on one level and free on another. What's rigid about this is that it says where the novelty will occur. What's open about it is it never says what the novelty will be, so that, Saddam Hussein could probably avert a world war by just announcing that he's going on a world ballet tour, and that would be so novel that the wave would be fulfilled and the war of a touring ballet company. What? He could be assassinated, although that isn't in his situation. That wouldn't exactly be absolutely startling. It would be a micro pivot there. I find assassinations very interesting. They're very little wear and tear on innocent people, you'll notice. That's why it's so little favored as a way of settling political problems. But I have a German correspondent who has taken this between the teeth and run with it. And he sent me a bunch of assassination printouts on a scale of 30 days. The assassination of John F. Kennedy, Wallenstein, Himmler, a bunch of people. And they're, it's tantalizing. I mean, I don't know what to make of this. It's reasonable that large-scale phenomena like history, like glaciations, would be under the control of recursive laws, algorithmically expressible laws. The hard swallow is to think that you've actually figured one out, and that this is it, and that to the exclusion of all other values, these values somehow define it. But I think that thinking of history as a novelty-conserving journey of return to the green mind is a much more helpful existential than to think of it as a chaotic, trendless fluctuation toward self-immolation. Just a drunken person wandering around in a dynamite storage area, which is sort of the other model being peddled. Because I believe that there is a purpose, that there is some kind of telos working its way out. I won't get all dewy-eyed about it. I don't even know why or what for, but I just know that statistical models of how human reality works are completely inadequate. I mean, the way most people experience magic in their lives is through the phenomenon of falling in love. And it's highly statistically improbable the way it works. I mean, you can be the guy who sweeps up in the mailroom and every day you see the boss's daughter alight in her Rolls Royce to be swept into the executive suite or some nonsense like that. And by merely forming the wish to be with this woman, then coincidences begin to move, promotions occur, deaths occur, mountains are moved, and before you know it, the princess is delivered unto your arms, for better or worse, one might add. I mean, you need to be very careful about what you wish for because you usually get it. The rule about wishing seems to be it's a kind of a quantum mechanical process, and no jerking is allowed. The key to having your wishes fulfilled is slow, steady pressure. And if you can hold an image for 2 or 3 years, it hardly matters how outlandish it is. It will probably be delivered unto you in fairly good order.
I'm struck by this, by the micromacrocosm aspect of it, which is very Taoist.
Yeah, that this goes right down from the level of Planck's constant right up to the size of the universe. And it's saying the same patterns, the same processes are recursive and are nested, and basically the all-rightness of everything. Because what it shows is, this is a fairly chaotic wave. It looks stochastic, but it's manipulated in such a way that out of its disorder emerges a very elegant, self-reinforcing, self-refining order, streamlining itself for further journey into time. Well, that's enough of that, I think.